In the post-pandemic era, many businesses in the private sector are downsizing office space since so many employees are working remotely or adopting hybrid schedules. It's been reported that about 52% of companies are planning to reduce their office space over the next 3 years. These same changes are also affecting the federal government. As I'm sure you're aware, the Government Accountability Office noted that 17 of 24 major federal agencies' headquarters in the D.C. are less than 25% occupied. How much does GSA spend annually to maintain and operate office space for federal agencies?
Thanks for that question, Congresswoman. We talked about this a little bit in the first session. We have a federal buildings fund is where agencies that have space in buildings or have leased space pay rent effectively.
Right.
And so that amount every year is around more or less $11 billion.
$11 billion.
And that's just rental payments. So that's different than your question, which was about how much we spend.
To maintain.
Right. So what happens is that federal buildings fund actually is shorted every year in what we're allowed to spend. So typically what will happen, about half of our portfolio is leased and half is owned. And so for the leased portion, that rent just immediately goes out the door and pays the owner of the building, right, in whatever the community the building is in. And the other half is meant to go back into maintenance of the buildings.
Okay.
What's happened over the last 12 years is that portion has been basically siphoned off to pay for other things. Okay. So that's why we haven't been able to reinvest in buildings as much as people are paying rent.
That's not my issue. If 70% of a major federal agency headquarters are only 25% occupied, I believe we can find substantial savings by downsizing office space. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
All right. With potentially billions of dollars wasted each year on underused assets, what is GSA doing to save taxpayers' money?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We take this very seriously. I could not agree with you more that we have an opportunity to really save billions of dollars for taxpayers.
Okay, so let me follow up. So how are you determining when it's necessary to downsize office space?
So our team has done a portfolio-wide review, national portfolio review, to figure out which buildings we should keep and which buildings we should dispose of. I think that this is a huge first step. We announced last week already that 23 of those are going to be put up through the disposal process. Just those 23 buildings is a reduction of 3.5 million square feet of space and a potential in cost avoidance, and again, this isn't even talking about the value when we sell it, of over $1 billion. So we are eager to work with y'all to get this done.
Ordinary American small businesses in corporate America cannot afford to pay for space they barely use, let alone help the federal government pay for its unused space. So how quickly is GSA going to push agencies to consolidate office space based on the study you just mentioned?
Well, we are working with agencies all the time as they're rethinking how much space they need. And so that's an important thing that the team does every day. In the end, by the way, we don't force them to make a decision. They have to decide based on their mission how much space they need. But we try to give them alternatives. You know, one of the things that we're seeing nowadays is when people are in offices, they want to work a little bit differently, right? There is collaboration space, there are meeting rooms, there are other kinds of configurations rather than individual offices that make more sense. And so we're really working with agencies on that.
I have one more question I want to squeeze in. If D.C.-based federal employees, including yourself, choose to telework a majority of the time from lower-cost areas in the country, should they continue to receive the additional 32.49% locality pay increase for the D.C. area?
So the issue of locality pay is something that our HR department thinks about all the time to make sure that the taxpayers are getting the value and that people are getting what they...
So how much would taxpayers save if teleworking employees were paid the wage that corresponds with their actual location of work?
So I think that's a question I'll have to ask for OPM because I think they are better suited to be able to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we need to pursue these issues that have been brought forth by Ms. Carnahan and see what Congress can do to force these agencies to downsize and save taxpayers' money.
As you know, government property designated as surplus can be sold to local and state governments and the public. Given the fact that teleworking has significantly increased over the past few years, has the amount of surplus property sold increased at the same rate?
You want her? I'll recognize.
So as I mentioned, Congressman, just last week, we announced 23 properties that we want to put on the disposal list, and that would be a cost savings of $1 billion and a reduction of 3.5 million square feet.
I get that. Now, I guess my point is you know, we're talking trillions in these debts that we have. Are we missing some areas that could be utilized or looked at for surplus or for disposal?
Look, I think there is a huge opportunity at this moment to both get out of leases that saves a lot of money, billions of dollars, and get out of unneeded buildings, also saving billions of dollars. But as I said before, the reason that this is slow, and this is not just me saying it, this is what the GAO said in their report, is it is lack of access to the Federal Buildings Fund. Again, that is the fund that rent payments go into. When agencies pay rent, that either goes to the owner of the building if it's a lease, or it goes to maintain buildings if it's owned. Every year for the past 12 years, we have had more than $1 billion used for other things. That's a choice made by the Appropriations Committee. So as a result, we have backlog. As a result, we're unable to move people into new space. And so the one secret thing that we can do, the secret bullet to fix this, is to have certainty around the Federal Buildings Fund, and we will absolutely be able to accelerate these disposals and save more money.
So in a priority aspect, I just want to make sure I have this right. If a state, a local, or a business wants this property, who gets that? Or is it based upon price?
So there are various factors. I wish I could say it was simple, but there's sort of a rank order, and state and local government gets the first shot at that. And then eventually, if NGOs don't want it, state and local governments don't want it, then it goes on to the public market. And so that's, as I mentioned, those 23 properties that we're planning to dispose of, we already have interest from some local governments to think about, you know, former courthouses could become new municipal, you know, halls. And so that, to me, is what makes sense here. We need to have our federal assets be useful in the communities where they're sitting. And if they don't have people in them, they're not being useful there, and they ought to be used in other ways. Got you.
Could they also be looked at from different groups like veterans? How do veterans play in these?
Well, certainly, if the VA needs some of these buildings, we could talk to them about reusing it. That wouldn't be a disposal. That would be a transfer to a different agency.
Gotcha. What percentage of federal acquisitions are American-made?
As we sit here today, I don't know that number, but I will ask my team to find out and circle back with you, sir.
Okay. How many waivers allowing the agencies to buy foreign-made projects have been granted under the Biden administration?
Same answer. I don't have that as I sit here, but we can find it.
Okay, and what trends do the agencies buying American products look like? For our agencies buying more American-made products under the current administration or less?
Well, it's a very high priority for the president and the whole administration to use our federal buying power to support American jobs and American industry. So, again, I will get back to you with the numbers, but just know it's a priority.
Okay.
In fact, I had an amendment that was accepted last week on the floor to defund completely 18F. You have spoken today about the successes related to the project of the GSA. Can you go back and tell us about 18F and your viewpoint about 18F as it relates to these OIG reports in relationship to our history of holding a hearing that was bipartisan condemnation of 18F and their relevance to misleading the government, including the IRS, about the viability and visibility of those people who came in through login.gov?
Well, thanks for the question, Congressman. I want to bifurcate it a little bit, if that's okay with you. So 18F, just to give a little bit of a history, is a technology team that's inside a group called the Technology Transformation Service at GSA.
Right.
That has hundreds of people in it, and they are doing great work for the American people.
It was started by President Obama as an experiment. Is that correct?
So I wasn't there at the very beginning, but I do know that after the healthcare.gov mess, like we can all call it that, where the technology did not work, I think President Obama at that time understood that policy doesn't get done if you can't deliver it, and delivery today needs to be technology. So there were lots more technologists that were brought into the government at that time. I joined, I think actually in January 15?
You joined in February of 2016 is what
Okay,
I
16.
have been provided.
All right, that may be right. All these time is an illusion nowadays. But I was there for a year during the Obama administration and several years of the Trump administration as well. And I focused on state and local government primarily, because that's my background. What I found when I was an elected official in my home state is that too often you're reinventing the wheel all over again.
Yes, ma'am, but let's go to the subject of that, and that is that it would be considered, if it were not in government, a complete fraud, a fraudulent operation that operated outside the scope of its own laws and its own responsibilities. Can you go to that point, or are you going to try and talk about working around the issue rather than going to the answer? I want to know about 18F, about the way they operated, about the way they misled and lied to the government about what their performance would be, what they could be counted on, including biometric data, and up to and including taking over $10 million to operate this fraudulent operation. I want to know what you think about that.
Well, look, my job is to make government work better for the American people and save money doing it. So
Okay,
that's
thank
what
you
I'm
very
gonna
much.